Hello and welcome back to the Start a Glamping Business podcast. Today we have a podcast host that I actually listen to on a regular basis and I actually recommend a lot of our listeners listen to as well. It's Zach Busekrus. He is the founder of Spontaneous, which is a startup which delivers really good Airbnb deals right to subscribers' inbox. And he's also the host of the Behind the Stays podcast, which is a podcast that interviews Airbnb owners and unique stay operators to hear their stories, their origins, tips, tricks, etc. for running that kind of business. And I've always said that there's a lot of parallels and overlaps between the Airbnb and glamping industries, and I'd probably say glamping is, a subset or a sister industry to the short-term rental industry. So going to be lots of overlaps today, hopefully lots of value as well. So Zach, thank you for coming on and welcome to the show.
Yeah, dude, thank you so much for having me. I think we've been connected on social for a little bit, and I've really just enjoyed learning a little bit about what you guys are up to and what you're building, and it's just a pleasure to finally get this opportunity to connect and to chat. So thanks for having me on.
No problem at all. Well, I've given the sort of 10-15 second intro. You're going to be able to introduce yourself far better than I will. So just to sort of set the scene a little bit, can you explain a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you do today with a particular focus on Spontaneous and Behind the Stays, please?
Yeah, absolutely. As concisely as possible. I'm a growth marketer by trade, right? So I have spent the last decade or so working in growth marketing, primarily in the context of an agency that specializes actually in higher education marketing and student recruitment. So think agencies that help colleges find and attract the right fit students, right? And so I help devise their social content plans, their SEO strategies, their paid strategies, et cetera. So I really sort of cut my teeth in growth marketing within the context of this agency. And then when COVID hit, my wife and I actually were living in Washington, D.C., which is... I'm biased, but one of the best, if not the best city in the world from my perspective. It's an incredibly clean city. We love DC, but we were living in the city. We were in a 1-bedroom apartment. It was a smaller apartment, 600 square feet, and it was tough because COVID had hit, and we were working remotely, both on Zoom calls. And long story short, we realized this wasn't tenable. Like we weren't going to be able to keep this up. So we actually broke our lease. And we decided to go Airbnb hopping. It was during COVID, right? So we were driving everywhere. We were mostly in like remote locations, but we got the idea of Spontaneous, and the idea which would ultimately come to be the Behind the Stays podcast while we were living full time in short-term rentals. So it was an incredible journey. Happy to dive into more of that if and when it might be helpful or appropriate. But that's where Spontaneous came from. We were finding these incredible last-minute deals. We realized if we could be flexible with where we went and when we went and how long we stayed, we could score some pretty remarkable deals, right? This is before I knew anything about like dynamic pricing or anything about, hey, many hosts often discount stays if they're longer. I knew nothing about the industry, but we were finding all these deals. We were sending them to friends and family, and before we knew it, people were saying, hey, can you send that deal that you find to my buddy Frank and my buddy Joe? And so we decided to start a newsletter. We whipped up a little bit landing page. A couple people in the tech world kind of saw it and shared it, and that's how Spontaneous got started. So my entrance into the hospitality space is very new. I've only been around it's only been a couple years now, and I'm still soaking everything up, learning a ton, but it's been such a welcoming space. People like you, Nick, who have been so kind and generous with your time and your ideas and whatnot. So I'm a newbie. I'm still learning a lot, but it's been a privilege to be able to build what we've built so far, and I'm looking forward to continuing to build and serve the industry.
Yeah, and so you've gone from having a standard 9 to 5 completely outside of the industry to sort of starting 2-3 side hustles within the industry. And from listening to your recent podcast, it sounds like it's going to become a full-time job pretty soon. You're clearly extremely passionate about the Airbnb and short-term rental industry. So kind of what sparked that passion? Was that there before you became like a professional Airbnb traveler? Was it was it sparked by that? Was it inspired by that? So how did that sort of passion come about, and then why are you so passionate about the industry?
Yeah, I was reflecting on this recently. I dropped a solo podcast on my podcast feed actually this morning, the morning that we're recording this episode, and I was realizing that while I can't pinpoint a specific moment where I really fell in love with hospitality, I've always really loved ambiance, and I've loved how when a space is designed well, right? When somebody has thought very, very intelligently and very creatively about how to craft a specific kind of experience, and you walk into that room or that restaurant or that hotel lobby and you feel that, and it changes the way that you're feeling, or the way that you felt is different from how you felt moments before you walked through that door, right? That's like magical, right? And the ability to literally like inspire somebody from one state into another based off of how you've thought about like candles and fragrances and, you know, lighting and music, or, you know, and service, right? That's a superpower as far as I'm concerned, right? It's pretty remarkable. And when you have a conversation in a space that's been well thought about, well crafted, well designed, it actually can be the tenor of that conversation, the tone of the conversation, the content discussed there can be incredibly different when it's a beautiful space versus when, you know, you're under like fluorescent lights, right? In like a smelly high school gym or whatever, right? You could have the same conversation, but the feeling during the conversation and the outcomes of that conversation, I would argue, would be completely different depending on where that conversation happened. So that's a long way of saying I've had this desire and this appreciation for beautifully designed spaces for a while, which I have only come to realize in recent years, over the last couple of years, that that sort of fits under like the larger umbrella of hospitality. But I wouldn't have used that language before. I wouldn't have said that I loved hospitality. Now in hindsight, I can say that I think what I have always been interested in was the experiential design aspects of the space, and why it's so important is because I really do believe that when you design something well, when the mood is correct, so to speak, really, really magical things can happen. Connections can be made, ideas can be born. And I think for any entrepreneur in particular, those sorts of things really, really, really matter and are worth paying attention to.
Yeah, and you're right, and that is applicable to the whole of hospitality. You know, it's not just a glamping site. It can be a tiny little Airbnb apartment, or it can be a massive hotel. It really is applicable across the board.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I'm sure, you know, that was maybe a latent passion, but that really got ignited by traveling and staying in Airbnbs for 18 months. You know, I feel like it's a great dinner party conversation starter, that experience. A little bit like we had Jeff Wilson from Dupe on the podcast a couple of months ago, and you know, living in a dumpster for however long he lived in a dumpster for. It's a similar kind of thing where something unique that other people sort of won't have really, let's be honest, had the balls to do. So tell us a little bit more about that experience and how you know, where did you go? How long did you stay for? What kind of experience did you pick up, etc., on that sort of Airbnb traveler journey?
Yeah, well, one of the questions I get asked a lot is like, how far did you guys like plan things out, right? Like, and did you have your full itinerary set before you hit the road? And I mean, it was a truly spontaneous, pun totally intended, adventure in that we had planned 30 days out. So before we broke our lease and we knew we were going to be for 1 month. But then beyond that, everything was very serendipitous. It was that we would literally pull up the Airbnb map, like the map view on Airbnb. And one of the things I like to clarify for folks is I've only come to realize in the last 12 to 18 months or so, right, like what a short-term rental was and what a vacation rental was. I in my mind, those things were all sort of like Airbnbs, and you know, maybe that's just indicative of like my age, right? But like me and my peer group, we call a vacation rental or an STR an Airbnb. Now, a lot of people in the space, as you probably know, Nick, don't like that characterization, and so that said, my wife and I did exclusively travel via the Airbnb platform. So every single place that we booked during that year and a half, we booked through Airbnb. In hindsight, I wish I had used some of these host direct booking sites, but hey, hindsight's 2020, right? So anyways, what we did is we used the map view, and we would just kind of scroll. We knew generally like, okay, let's head west. But we had no plans. We could go someplace. We stayed in some places for 2 nights and other places for 2 weeks, right? We only stayed in a couple places for about 2 weeks. Most of the time it was between like 5 and 7 days. That was like the standard. But then there were, you know, of course, a night here, a couple nights here, you know, 3-day weekend there, whatever. And what we did which was truly like remarkable in hindsight, is we'd reach out to these hosts and we'd say, and remember like the time here, right? So this is late fall of 2020. So COVID's been around, right, since March of 2020. People are starting to get like tired of it. Travel was kind of coming back, and this is like right before like the boom, the Airbnb boom, as it's often called in the industry, of like everyone deciding to like buy Airbnbs in like, the middle of nowhere and go live there with their families and whatnot. So it was around the time when travel was coming back, but there was still a lot of hosts who had lost an incredible amount of money through cancellation. So people were willing to kind of work with you. So I think part of the reason we were able to do this and afford to stay in some of these remarkable places was because hosts were kind of hungry for guests that were going to take care of their space, guests that could be flexible, and guests that were willing to pay, close to what they were asking for. So in terms of kind of most memorable moments from this whole experience, the number one thing that I fell in love with was the people behind these places, which ultimately inspired the launch of my podcast, Behind the Stays. When you enter a space that's been, as I mentioned before, so highly curated and so well thought about and so well cared for, you can't help but be inspired. And I would find myself just being like, oh my gosh, this is an incredibly gorgeous farm stay, or whoa, this grain silo. Who'd have thunk you could stay in a grain silo and that it would be high end, right? And you'd have the best night of sleep that you ever had on this, gorgeous king mattress, right? In a grain silo. So there were all these incredible, unique stays that we got to experience, and it just, all I could think about anytime we walked into a space was, who the hell thought of this? And like, what gave them, to your earlier point, what gave them the balls to figure out how to do this, and how do I learn from them, right? So that was the impetus that ultimately launched my podcast, was just this genuine curiosity of, first and foremost, the level of detail that so many of these places had that was poured into these spaces was remarkable. And then second, I really just wanted to know, how did you bring this to life, and why, right? What are you trying to do? So that curiosity's inspired the podcast. And then the last thing I'll say on this, I could talk about the actual experience forever, but the second thing I'll say on the actual overarching experience was just a deep appreciation for how beautiful people are, right? Like, and again, this was a time, right, where the country was incredibly divided, and we were in places that were where COVID like seemingly didn't exist, and then we were in other places that were total ghost towns, right? But one of the things that I felt was so true about every single place that we stayed in is that the hosts were incredibly generous and incredibly thoughtful. And it reminded me, and I think I reminded my wife of the people that we would meet, the hosts themselves, just like at the end of the day, we have so much more in common than we do that differ from each other. And that, at the end of the day, is really worth celebrating. And I think hospitality is one of those unique sectors and unique spaces where you really can kind of celebrate and appreciate diversity across all spectrums, because most, if not everybody, loves to travel. And I think that was a beautiful reminder that we got while we were hopping around.
Hi everyone, thanks for listening. This is just a quick note to say that this podcast is brought to you by Glamptex in North America. And what we do is we help you through the process of starting a glamping business, no matter what stage you're at. So if you need to find a property, we'll tell you where the most suitable area is to start your glamping business. If you have a property, we'll look at your local zoning code and tell you how likely you are to get your project off the ground according to the zoning rules and regulations in your local area. We'll also give you a really good roadmap of permits that you'll need and regulations that you'll need to be aware of to get your glamping business off the ground. If you need financing, we'll introduce you to our range of financing partners and do you a feasibility study that will give you some really solid financial projections and market analysis that will allow you to acquire the funding that you need. If you need glamping units, we'll talk you through your options and introduce you to one of our trusted manufacturing partners to ensure that you're looked after throughout the whole process. If you need a site design or if you need permits to move forward with your project, we've got architects who will do all your drawings, make all your arguments, and essentially allow your dream to become a reality. The list goes on, and I don't want to bore you, so I'll let you get back to the episode in a second. All I'd say is that Glamprotect North America are the people to speak to about starting a glamping business in the US or Canada. So if you're even thinking of starting a glamping business, just get in touch with us at contact@glamprotect.com or 646-586-2330. All the details are in the description, and no matter what stage of the process you're at, we will be able to help, whether it's doing something ourselves or pointing you in the right direction of our partners. Just let us know that you came from the podcast, and we'll see about doing you a little discount along the way. So thanks for listening, and I'll let you get back to the episode. Yeah, and you mentioned like the grain silos. Obviously, this podcast is generally focused on glamping.
Yeah.
And glamping has, some people will say glamping is tent camping, luxury tent camping only, whereas others will say it can include, in the UK we've got a few like double-decker bus, sort of glamping sites. So was there any other sort of completely unique stays like the grain silos that you stayed in that could maybe fall in that category that you just thought, as you say, how on earth did they come up with this idea?
Yeah, I mean, we stayed in several places, but one that was really cool was it was like this glass box basically that overlooked the Columbia River Gorge, and it was just absolutely stunning. And it was actually a place where you could camp on the property, or they had these like slightly like higher end, not slightly, they were definitely higher end, but glass box experiences, and they were all like independently owned. Some were just condos that people used to vacation at, and then others were actual short-term rentals. And we got to stay in one of those that was unbelievably just like stunning and gorgeous. We stayed in grain silos. We stayed in tree houses. Some more recently have had the opportunity to stay in some especially unique cabins and other stays. I think you had a friend of mine, Ben Wolf, on the podcast recently who talked all about what he's doing with Onera. I got the opportunity to go and stay in some of his places there, which were amazing. So
I need to save up some money if I'm going to stay at Ben's site.
Yeah, no. Let's be clear. I could not have afforded to stay there. He was very generous, but anyways, those experiences, I think, to your point, right? We're living through a moment where people are craving unique stays. They're craving unique experience, and I firmly believe that there's huge opportunity in the glamping space. I actually had somebody from Mendocino Grove on my podcast. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what they're doing out in Mendocino, California, and he was talking about how they rent their like gorgeous like canvas tents for like $375-$400 a night, and I'm like, $400 a night, in Ben's place, $1,000 a night or whatever it is, like that doesn't really seem like glamping. That seems like, I don't know, like capital G glamping, or something like that. But it is really cool to see sort of this niche of stays emerge. And I think you would know way better than me, Nick, but I do think that this is a space that's actually, like, if you're interested in hospitality, it's probably easier to get in and build a concept like this, at least at the start, than it is to go do what Ben did at Onera, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I comparatively, I see the STR, short-term rental industry as really advanced. I know maybe people in the industry don't see it that way, but compared to glamping, short-term rental industry has got a whole load of sort of Silicon Valley tech infrastructure around it. Look at yourself. You've got a tech startup essentially, sending sort of the best deals to people's inboxes. There's all sorts of tools to help operators and everything like that. There really isn't that ecosystem around glamping. We're looking to develop our own sites, and we are absolutely going to just be stealing the short-term rental tools and techniques and applying them to glamping. But you have to do that because there isn't that bespoke infrastructure around it, and that all sort of leads to the point that glamping is so new and so niche. Vacation rentals, long before Airbnb existed, the concept of vacation rentals and short-term rentals have always existed. Whereas glamping is, you could say people were going out in tents, 100 years ago, but really the concept of glamping has only evolved in the last 10 years, really. Yeah. And so that's why it is such an exciting time to be part of the industry. At the minute, it's very much like the little cousin of the short-term rental industry. But there are some seriously big brands that are about to emerge that have been building for the last few years. I hope to build one of them, and so we're very early, and it is an exciting time to sort of be part of the industry. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes and who shapes it and how it's shaped. But definitely something that I always think, I think it's only a matter of time before the big short-term rental investors realise just how good the returns in glamping can be as well.
Yeah.
You're looking at 2-3 year returns straight away, which is just unheard of. So I agree. I think it's a pretty exciting sort of place to be involved in.
I was just going to validate everything that you're saying too, and you said you had Jeff Wilson on the podcast from Jupe, and he's a great dude. He's been on my show as well, and I think what they're trying to do is one great example of this. From the folks at Mendocino Grove, his name is escaping me. Jacob from Mendocino Grove. Jacob Halveston, I think is his last name. Anyways, what we were talking about what I was talking about with Jeff and also with Jacob, which I think is totally just validates what you're saying, is that the whole like getaway concept of these like beautiful kind of cabins that are disconnected from the internet. They've got a big glass window, but it's fully enclosed. That stuff is incredible, right? There's Unplugged in like the UK, and there's other examples of this, but what we haven't really figured out, and I think what Jacob is doing and what Jeff is doing is aligned with this, is that part of me still wants to like be more immersed in nature. Like I want like one level down from like a getaway house to feel like I'm actually camping, right? And not just staying in the beautiful like glass box. That's great, and I think that you could argue that absolutely fits into sort of like the glamping umbrella, but I do think there is huge opportunity to give people like just a few more comforts than they would expect otherwise. Make sure that those comforts are high in quality, and then what you can charge and what people are willing to pay to feel like they can actually hear like the birds and like hear like the animals wrestling in the woods, and they're not as protected maybe as they might be in a glass box. I think that that's the next level of experiential that people are looking for.
Well, maybe we need a spontaneous for glamping, because there are there are sites like that. They generally sort of tend to be, I suppose, the mom and pop operations. The people who maybe have a bit of spare land and have put a few tents on there, and they can't charge $1,000 a night like Ben can, but it is a completely different experience, and some people prefer that experience, and obviously it's a lot more affordable for people. So there definitely is out there. It's maybe a little bit hard to find because they don't have the sort of getaway brands, but maybe that's your next move on the spontaneous.
Maybe.
Just before we move on from the experience you had traveling and staying in Airbnbs, was there anything in that experience that you observed, you clearly kind of studied it? Was there anything that you picked up from living in Airbnbs and unique stays for 18 months that you think prospective glamping, Airbnb, outdoor hospitality, whatever you want to call it, operators should sort of pay heed to, and that you would say is really important to create a really good hospitality experience?
Honestly, the first thing, there's probably lots of things, but the first thing that popped into mind was that it doesn't matter what your price per night is, you have to offer a product that is exceptionally clean, right? Like, and again, glamping, that can be tough to do, but like there's nothing worse than walking into a space, especially a space where you've paid several $100s for, and it kind of looks clean, but you're also like trying to not look in certain places because you're like, not sure that's been cleaned well, right? I think if folks in the glamping world and folks in the outdoor hospitality world want to be taken seriously and want to be able to charge a premium for their stays, again, it doesn't matter what your cost per night is. Ensure first and foremost that you have an exceptionally clean product, as clean as could possibly happen given the context that it might be in, right? That is such a missed. It's so simple, and I think if the space is going to professionalize, and if folks really want to compete with higher end travel options like staying in a 4 or 5 star hotel, you cannot deliver a product that is not exceptionally clean. So that's the first thing that I'd say.
And that speaks, again, a lot of people say it and how hard it is to find these people, but that speaks to the value of finding a good cleaner.
Yeah.
A good cleaning company. It's it's not the sexy part of that you dream of when you start this kind of business, but it's absolutely vital, right?
Yeah, and between you and me, Nick, like I and I guess everyone else listening to this, I have stayed in places where it costs close to $1,000 a night, and I've been underwhelmed by the cleaning. And that's not cool. Like, that is not cool, right? And And I'm a very forgiving person. I'm like in the industry now, so like I'm not gonna write a bad review or anything. I'll talk to the host directly, but like that's unacceptable. And if the industry is gonna professionalize, which I think there's huge opportunity for it to do, you've got to go back to the basics and make sure those are taken care of.
Yeah, I think it's an unsexy shout, but it's a good shout, and absolutely it can't be forgotten.
One last thing on this. And by the way, everyone's standard of clean is different. So what I would say is you need to find five people in your network, right, who all have slightly, different standards of cleaning, and or they're in different contexts. Maybe you get a mom, maybe you get like a, bachelor, maybe you get a couple, like maybe you get your crazy aunt that like is OCD or whatever it is. Find those five people and have them all evaluate the space, right? You can't just use your own judgment, because Nick, you might not care about cobwebs, but I might be freaked out by it, right? And so you need multiple people to audit the space.
I was going to say I'll just judge it by my mum's standards, basically. That would be my
standard. Hire Nick's mom.
Yeah. So yeah, you've explained how that experience sort of led to starting the Behind the Stays podcast. You want to learn about the background behind and the origin stories of these Airbnbs and outdoor stays. So just to give a bit of context about the podcast, could you just tell us a little bit about, for example, the typical guests that you'd have on, the kind of questions you ask, and the kind of sort of value, I suppose, that you tend to tease out on these podcasts?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, when I started my first podcast in a totally different industry, in higher ed, higher education marketing, and that grew to be one of the most trusted podcasts in the space, which was really, really cool. When I was looking at starting a podcast in the short-term rental space, I was just Googling around, like looking through Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and there are a lot out there, right? And so I was like, I don't know that, first of all, like I don't own a bunch of Airbnbs myself. I'm not a property manager. What value like do I really have to offer here? And then what I didn't find was a show that really talked about the people behind these spaces, right? And so I told you earlier that the reason I fell in love with this space was because of all the incredible entrepreneurs that were building these remarkable stays and the brands behind them. And I thought, hey, could we build like a Humans of New York, right, but podcast for the short-term rental space? And that was sort of the premise. It was like, I want people to meet these creators. Now, you're probably familiar with Levi Kelly's work. Levi Kelly is like a renowned YouTuber who does these incredible walkthroughs of some of the most unique Airbnbs, unique short-term rentals in the world. And Levi has just an incredible eye and does an exceptional job with his core product. But what I always thought was missing was like the people, like who created it. Like it's beautiful, it's incredible, it's so unique, but like who was the mastermind behind this? So I wanted to design a podcast that really shared the stories of the people in the industry. What in terms of kind of guests and stuff, we've grown, so we've had a lot of different people on, and some people might hate this, but from my perspective, like Behind the Stays is very much a reflection of like what I'm interested in any given moment, right? And so like the content does change and shift depending on what I find interesting. I podcast first and foremost for me, like I'm only doing this because I love it, right? And I love to learn. It's a benefit that other people get to listen in on this conversation, and of course I enjoy like sharing it with folks, and I love people, I love the industry, but if I'm not interested in a conversation, or I'm not interested in a particular topic, like I'm not gonna discuss it on my show just for the sake of discussing it on my show. And actually, in some ways, it's like limited our growth, right? Because I won't have certain people on, or I don't necessarily really care about certain topics relevant to the industry, and therefore, like I don't bring those folks onto my show. So my show has everyone from like the single Airbnb host who's got 50,000 followers on Instagram and one cabin, and they do not care at all about growth, right? They are so content with their one beautiful, very curated cabin in Maine, and that's it. Like they are happy. They are not trying to build a short-term rental empire. So I've got everyone from those folks to I've had influencers like Levi Kelly and Ethan Abbott's on my show. We've had other short-term rental hosts podcast hosts, like Sarah and Annette from Thanks for Visiting. They have one of the most popular podcasts on the space. Will Slickers, who's a wonderful name in the space, he's been on my show. Our show is actually now a part of his network, Hospitality FM. So people who are creators in the space, but then also, and maybe more interesting to folks listening here, folks that are really building in the experiential hospitality arena, right? So like Isaac French, who is seen as kind of a contemporary thought leader in experiential hospitality. He's been a good friend of mine. I've had him on the show a few times. He's doing incredible work.
Turned down my invite to come on this podcast.
Dude, lame. He's just so busy. He'll make it work at some point. But anyways, point being that like everyone in the experiential hospitality kind of space, folks who are young entrepreneurs like building their own portfolios. So we've had John Andrew from Wander on the show, and like that was a super dynamic, super fun, interesting conversation. And so I'd say, I know this is probably not that helpful, but who comes on the show is anyone who I'm particularly interested in like hearing their story and hearing how they see the world. And we're gonna have you on, Nick, soon, because I'm really interested in what you're doing and how you're thinking about this space. So I always like to tell folks like the bar to entry in some ways is like really easy to coming on behind the scenes. There's no like, I don't care about how big your audience is. What I really care about is, are you doing something that I just find intrinsically interesting, and are you willing to talk about it? And that is kind of the criteria for the show. So we're 130 or so episodes in, and I think it's working, but I don't know.
Good.
The listeners could probably tell you more.
And I appreciate this is probably like asking for a favorite child, but if you had if you could point to one guest, and maybe favorite isn't the right word here, I want the guest who you think has provided the most value to, say, listeners of this podcast, maybe people looking to create unique outdoor stays. Is there one episode in particular or one guest in particular that you would point them to that episode was just chock full of value, and our listeners should make sure they listen to?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I know I just mentioned him, but I do think the way that Isaac French thinks and talks is like maybe a lot of the folks who have listened to this have already heard a lot about Isaac, and if so, I've got another recommendation. But
they would have if he'd accepted my invite to this podcast.
Yes. If you haven't been following Isaac French, or you haven't listened to his story, he's just got a really unique perspective on the space, and I think what he's been able to do with his kind of first project, Live Oak Lake, is truly just remarkable, and has attracted a lot of attention because of the way that he's thought about, I think, guest experience, and also thought about creating as automated of a process as possible without compromising on the hospitality component to this day, which I think doing both of those things in tandem is incredibly difficult. His is not glamping, but they're smaller, like unique cabins, all on one property. So there's probably a lot that your listeners could learn from him. Mm-hmm. But if you have already listened to Isaac French and you know his stuff, the other person that I'd go and listen to Jacob Halveston's podcasts from Mendocino Grove and what they're doing there, because it's probably the closest thing that I think other folks who want to get into this, who either have land or don't have land yet, but they want to like ship like an MVP product. What they're doing, I think, is totally replicable, and what he shares in that show about like the numbers and how profitable it's been is super helpful. So for folks wanting to launch their first kind of glamping resort or whatever, I'd check them out. You just had Ben on the show. Ben from Monera is obviously another great resource. So Isaac's show, Jacob's episode. I've also talked with Ben, so you could go listen to his if you want more Ben in your life as well.
And just for our listeners, we had Nate Viets on last week or the week before, who is the marketing guy who does the marketing for Live Oak Lake and Isaac French. So that may be a bit of an intro until Isaac accepts my request to come on here. So going from one specific episode that's provided value, you've interviewed over 100 Airbnb and outdoor hospitality operators. Has there been a general theme that you would say across all of those successful guests, guests on the podcast, hosts of their stay, a general theme, general tactics or tips that they have applied or had within them that you would say has likely contributed to their success?
I think the most successful people, and success is obviously such a loaded word, so I'll just say the people that I have found the most interesting are the folks that have resisted growth for the sake of growth. Meaning, you think of Isaac, right? And he's developed this great name for himself in the space. Isaac has like 7 units, right? Meaning, Live Oak Lake is not like a 70, let alone 700 like room outdoor resort or anything like that, right? It's a pretty like humble in that it's a relatively small operation compared to what you might find in the industry. Like I've had folks on my show that they own and manage hundreds of stays, right? And so it's the reason I think folks like Isaac are intriguing. I would actually put John Andrew from Wander, obviously very different. Wander's raised a bunch of money, right? John Andrew is an incredible entrepreneur, but where I see great overlap is Wander's been like intentionally slow to grow. Like if you go and you look at Wander, and they're like it's a different offering, right? It's like a high end, larger accommodation, typically like group stays, because they're expensive. And I don't know how you could afford it as like a single person, but like they're incredibly like gorgeous experiences. But what I think John Andrew and Isaac and even like Ben from Onera having in common is this like understanding of where things are going and understanding of like growth is important, but also really understanding that you've got to prove the model first, right? Obsess over the model. Obsess over the 2 tents you start with or the 2 safari things that you get, right? Make those exceptional in every way, shape, and form, and then expand. You can always expand later. Like, I don't know what it is. It's probably just like startup culture and VC culture, but I think we are addicted to growth for the sake of growth. And I think the reality of the situation is that if you want to scale an incredibly profitable business and you want to grow a big brand for your organization, great. Nail your first unit, right? Or first collection of units. And if you deliver an exceptional experience there, it's going to be significantly easier to scale than when it's a subpar experience and you think I got to grow in order to make the experience better. That doesn't work in hospitality. It doesn't work in this space.
And so, Zach, apologies, this question wasn't on the running order. I hope it doesn't stump you.
No.
But, I
haven't even looked at it once, so I don't even know if we're on track at all.
You've been a professional Airbnb traveler for 18 months. You've interviewed around 150 operators. You're an exceptional marketer, and you've got some great contacts. That to me seems like a great recipe for building an Airbnb or unique stay empire of your own. Have you ever considered getting into that game?
Oh, Nick. No, of course. And I've got my ideas. What I'm trying to do is keep, because people have been so generous with like their time and sharing their stories with me. I feel like I need to wait until it's ready to kind of talk about it. But yes, it's very much something that I am working on. It'll be different, I think, than what a lot of folks are doing. It'll definitely be small, right up front. But no, absolutely. How could you not? If you love this space, how could you not?
Well, we will get you on when we hear more about that and we see it. That'll be great. So yeah, I mean, thank you, Zach. Really good episode. Lots of great value. Where should people go to if they want to hear more about you, or if they want to listen to your podcast or subscribe to Spontaneous? Give us all the links and places to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to find the best last minute Airbnb deals, you can sign up for Spontaneous at spontaneous.com. You could also just Google last minute Airbnb deals. We rank number 1. Which is awesome. So you can go and subscribe there. If you are a host and you are interested in getting your unique stay or your glamping site on Spontaneous, you could join our partner program. We'd love to have you. And if you want to just listen to Behind the Stays and learn from other great people in the industry in and around the outdoor experiential hospitality space, you could just Google Behind the Stays and find it wherever you get your podcasts. And yeah, dude, I am so appreciative of, if you want to connect with me directly too, you can follow me on Twitter or connect with me on LinkedIn. I love connecting with folks personally. So, Nick, I can just give you my handle and my LinkedIn link, and folks can find me there.
Yeah, we'll put all the links in the description, no problem at all. So thank you again, Zach, for coming on. As I say, it sounds like there's a potentially exciting project in the works, so I'm sure you'll be back on when that comes to fruition. But for now, thank you very much.
Thank you, man. It's been a pleasure.
No problem.